The battlefield falls quiet, the ground soaked with blood, the clang of swords now gone, the shouts of men now just echoes in the wind. Among the dead and wounded, leaning against a broken shield, sits a king. His breath comes hard, blood darkens his armor. His name is Arthur Pendragon. The once and future king, they will call him in years to come. But right now, he is just a dying warrior who knows something most men never learn, that true power lasts longer than a man's body. A sword is cut through his armor, his blood drips onto the earth, yet his eyes still burn bright with a fire that won't go out. What makes a king speak wisdom as he dies when other men would just curse and rage? What makes a leader think about what comes after him when his own time is running out like sand through fingers? This is what makes some men forgotten and others remembered forever. In Arthur's final hour, with dead men all around him, with the bitter taste of betrayal still fresh, with his kingdom breaking apart, he understood what few ever do, that a king's greatest moment isn't when he wins, but when he loses. Not when he conquers, but when he falls. Not when he gives orders that men must follow, but when he earns their loyalty even after he's gone. As Bedivere, the last knight still with him, kneels at his side, Arthur whispers commands that will echo for hundreds of years. These final orders didn't come from fear. They came from something stronger, a clear knowing that a leader's true worth only shows when everything else is lost. Picture it in your mind. The sharp smell of blood hangs in the air. Armor that once shone in the sun, now dented and red with blood. Arthur's breathing comes rough and painful, but his voice stays strong as he tells Bedivere to take Excalibur, the sword that marked him as rightful king, and throw it back into the lake where it first came from. In this command lies the first lesson. True power knows when to let go of its symbols. Weak men grip their crowns and scepters until their dying breath. Average leaders think the things that show their power are the same as power itself. But Arthur? He knew Excalibur was just a tool, not the source of his greatness. The sword had done its job. Now it must go back to the water, kept safe from becoming just another stolen prize or dusty keepsake. When Bedivere can't bring himself to throw away such a mighty sword, and twice lies about doing it, Arthur's anger cuts deeper than any blade. What did you see? What did you hear? He demands. The knight admits his failure, unable to part with something so beautiful and powerful. Arthur doesn't scold him for disobeying, but for not understanding the deeper truth. The sword must return to the Lady of the Lake, not as giving up, but as knowing that true power moves in circles, not in straight lines. It doesn't stay in one place forever. Here stands the second lesson carved into Arthur's dying words. True leadership never accepts pretty lies. Even with death reaching for him, he holds his knight to the highest standard of truth. He gives no room for kind lies or soft words to make things easier. This hard-eyed facing of what's real, even when reality is tearing your life away, is what separates leaders who leave something behind from those who are quickly forgotten. When Bedivere finally does as told and returns, Arthur's face softens. Not from relief, but from knowing his knight finally understood. The sword flying through the air, caught by waters that close over it like time sealing a promise. This picture would burn itself into stories for hundreds of years. Why? Because it touches something deep inside all of us. The knowing that we too must someday let go of what we think makes us strong. As a boat appears through the mist to carry the wounded king away to Avalon, Arthur speaks his deepest command, not about his kingdom or battles, or even the round table that changed how kings ruled. Instead, he speaks of coming back. I will return, he promises, when Britain needs me most. In these words burns the third and most powerful lesson. A leader's duty goes beyond his own time on Earth. Arthur didn't cling to his last moments with fear. He looked ahead, past his own pain, past what was happening right then, past even his own death. He saw himself not as ending, but as a strength saved for future need. How many so-called leaders today only care about quick wins, about the next 3 months of profit, about who likes them right now? They aren't leaders, but just people wearing a leader's clothes for a while. Arthur's vision reached beyond his last breath. His promise stretched past the point where most promises fade away. This way of looking forward is what builds a name that lasts. Think about how Arthur's round table changed what power meant. Before, kings sat at the head, with importance measured by how close you sat to them. Arthur's new idea, a circle where no man was above others, completely changed how leadership worked. This wasn't just moving furniture around. It was a completely new understanding that true strength comes from equal voices, not from one man looking down on others. Yet even this groundbreaking idea would have been forgotten without Arthur's final act, the promise to return. By placing himself in the unknown future, he changed from just a historical person to an eternal idea. He became not just what was, but what could be again, what would be needed again. The boat vanishes into the mist, carrying Arthur to Avalon. Bedivere stands alone on the shore, seeing something few ever witness, a man becoming a legend, a dying body becoming an undying idea. The knight knew in that moment that though he would never again touch his king's hand or hear his voice, Arthur's commands would guide him for all his days. This creates Arthur's strongest legacy, the power to lead even when not present, to command loyalty not through force or fear, but by becoming part of the very soul of those who followed him. Each knight carried Arthur within themselves, his beliefs flowing through their actions even when separated by distance or death. Modern leaders often think they need to be seen all the time to have impact. They believe leadership means constant performance, endless reminding of who's in charge. Arthur teaches us the opposite truth, that the deepest leadership works even in absence. It becomes the invisible frame that shapes choices when no direct order can be heard. Think about what happened after Arthur left. His knights, those who lived, carried on his vision. The Round Table existed not just as a memory, but as a living idea. When facing hard choices, they asked not, "What helps me most?" but, "What would Arthur command?" His leadership had changed from outside direction to inner compass. This inner compass is leadership's highest achievement. When your words echo in hearts long after your real voice is silent. When your vision guides hands you can no longer touch. When your beliefs shape choices you can no longer directly influence. The biggest test of leadership never happens when you're at your strongest. It happens when you're broken, bleeding, taking your last breaths. What orders will you give then? Will they stretch your power beyond your last heartbeat? Or will your authority fade like morning fog when the sun of your presence sets? Arthur's final command holds one more lesson, maybe the most important one. As the boat disappeared into the mist, he didn't demand revenge against Mordred, who gave him the death wound. He didn't seek to punish those whose betrayals broke Camelot's glory. Instead, he focused completely on saving what mattered and returning when needed. on protecting what was important so it could serve again. Lesser leaders in defeat become eaten up with revenge. Their final orders focus on settling scores, on making enemies hurt, on soothing wounded pride. Arthur rose above this common weakness. He understood that true leadership concerns itself with building, not destroying, with creating future possibility, not paying back past hurts. This forward-looking vision explains why Arthur's story endures while countless other kings are forgotten. He understood something timeless about human nature, that we hunger not just for leadership right now, but for beliefs that last longer than one lifetime. We seek not just direction for today's fight, but guidance for battles our children might face when we are no longer standing beside them. Most people miss what makes Arthur's last command so different from normal human reaction. When badly wounded, every instinct screams for revenge, for self-protection, for desperate grabbing at what's slipping away. It takes rare wisdom to override these urges, to focus instead on what will outlast your heartbeat, what will help others when you can't. The wounded animal strikes out. The wounded king looks ahead. Arthur's order to return Excalibur shows another level of understanding, knowing that symbols must stay pure. By giving the sword back to the Lady of the Lake, he makes sure it remains perfect, unstained by defeat, unclaimed by unworthy hands. The sword waits under the waters, just as Arthur waits in Avalon, both kept safe in their essence, both removed from harm, both held in trust for future need. This protection of sacred symbols sets Arthur apart from rulers who let their marks of power become war prizes or dusty relics. The crown that passes from head to head through conquest loses some of its power with each new owner. The sword returned to magic waters keeps all its strength, all its meaning. Arthur instinctively knew what many leaders never learn, that symbols matter not for their gold and jewels, but for what they mean, and meaning must be protected at all costs. Think of Bedevir's struggle as he walks toward the lake, Excalibur heavy in his hands. Twice he fails, unable to throw away something so magnificent. What holds him back? Not just the sword's beauty, but what it stands for. The solid proof that Arthur's rule existed, that Camelot stood, that greatness once walked among men. Throwing it away feels like giving up the proof of everything worth remembering. Yet Arthur's command cuts through these feelings with sharp clarity. The sword must go back not despite its importance, but because of it. Its value demands protection beyond the reach of common hands. This teaches us perhaps the hardest leadership lesson, that sometimes we must let go of what we value most to make sure its true essence survives. How many leaders show such clarity in their final moments? How many can separate what must be kept from what must be released? How many understand that some principles must be protected from being twisted by unworthy keepers? Arthur's command shows not just wisdom, but sharp judgment, the ability to tell the difference between the cup and what it holds, between the symbol and its meaning, between what passes and what lasts. As the boat carries him to Avalon, Arthur leaves behind more than a kingdom. He leaves a pattern for timeless leadership. He sets a standard that will make lesser men feel small for hundreds of years. He creates a measuring stick against which all future rulers will be compared, and most will come up short. For what truly makes Arthur special is not his victories in battle, impressive though they were, not his creation of the Round Table, revolutionary though it was. not even his bringing together warring tribes into one kingdom, amazing though that achievement stands. What truly sets him apart is this final moment, wounded, dying, yet thinking entirely about what will help others long after he cannot. This selfless looking ahead forms the cornerstone of leadership that outlasts the leader. While small-minded rulers worry about statues and their own glory, true kings focus on planting trees whose shade they will never sit under. They establish principles that will guide decisions they will never see. They create systems that will work long after they cannot guide them. Arthur's deepest insight shone through his final command was his understanding that a king is not measured by the land he controls while alive, but by how far his influence reaches after death. Not by how many obey his direct orders, but by how many follow his vision freely when no orders can be given. Not by the power he holds with his living hand, but by the principles that continue working when that hand is still. This understanding completely changes what legacy means. Most leaders see legacy as what stays the same after they're gone. Buildings with their names, laws they created, wealth they gathered. Arthur understood that true legacy keeps moving, a living force that continues to shape events, inspire actions, and guide decisions long after the leader's physical presence ends. The knights who survived Camland didn't simply remember Arthur. They became like him. They carried forward not just memories of a king, but the living principles he created. Each time they gathered at the round table, even with its obvious empty seat, they weren't just showing loyalty to an absent man, but commitment to principles still present. This becoming explains why Arthur's influence grew rather than shrank after he left for Avalon. Most leaders' impact gets smaller with distance and time. Their orders lose force. Their vision blurs. Their authority fades. Arthur achieved the opposite. His influence grew clearer, stronger, more defined with each passing year. Stories became legends not because facts were stretched, but because essential truths became more clear with time. The power of his last command echoes in how we still talk about him today. We don't discuss Arthur in the past as someone gone and finished. We call him the once and future king, a power temporarily away but promised to return. This way of speaking reveals Arthur's mastery of leadership's highest form. He stepped outside of time itself, positioning his leadership not as a closed book, but as an ongoing resource, temporarily withdrawn but eternally available. Few leaders achieve this timelessness. Most remain stuck in their historical moment, their relevance fading as things change. Arthur broke this limitation through his final command. He established his leadership not as bound by time, but as timeless, not as specific to one situation, but as useful everywhere, not as interesting history, but as eternally necessary. As Bedivere watched the boat disappear into mist, he witnessed the moment leadership transformed from person to principle. From that point forward, what would Arthur do? Became more than a question. It became a compass. His physical absence didn't weaken his leadership. It purified it, distilling it to its essence. The man might be gone to Avalon, but the king's command remained, stronger, clearer, and more compelling in absence than it had been in presence. This transformation represents leadership's ultimate achievement. Most leaders' power diminishes with distance. Their influence has an expiration date. Their remembered words become less clear with time, like water leaking through loose fingers. Arthur achieved the opposite effect. His departure didn't end his leadership, it amplified it. His command didn't fade but echoed louder. His vision didn't blur but crystallized into perfect clarity. In your own battles, as you face your own Camland fields, remember this truth. The measure of your leadership will not be taken during easy victories, but in crushing defeats. Not when your strength stands unquestioned, but when wounds sap your power. Not when giving orders from a position of authority, but when whispering final commands as your strength ebbs away. Will your words carry weight when your body cannot? Will your vision guide when your eyes no longer see? Will your principles stand firm when you cannot stand at all? These are the questions that separate names remembered for a season from names that echo through ages. These are the tests that divide those who merely hold power from those who transform it into legacy. Arthur's final command, to preserve what matters, to release what only symbolizes power, to focus on future need rather than present pain, provides the framework for leadership that outlasts the leader. It offers the template for influence that defies time's passage. It presents the pathway to becoming not just a leader for your time, but a standard for all time. As you walk your own path, as you build your own round table, as you forge your own Excalibur, remember the wounded king on Camlan's bloody field. Remember his clarity when pain clouded all else. Remember his foresight when others could see only the pressing now. Remember his commitment to legacy when personal survival consumed all other thoughts. Then, ask yourself, what will be your final command? What principles will you preserve beyond your own time? What vision will you project into a future you will not see? Answer well, and like Arthur, you might discover that a leader's greatest power emerges precisely when all other power fails, when only clarity of purpose and unbreakable vision remain. The mist still waits, the lake still holds the sword, Avalon still keeps what matters most, and Arthur's command still guides those with the wisdom to hear it.